and thank you, Minister, for what I think is a very carefully crafted document. You don't give away too much, but you've obviously got stuff up your sleeve. I just want to first of all start by talking about the pensions, and really to use the opportunity to congratulate mainly women but also men who campaigned to have this measure reversed. And in a very extraordinary moment, you took the megaphone from me outside the Dáil to address a crowd of protesters when you were first made Minister, and I think that that was welcome, because you did in fact stick by your word and began to reverse this terrible discriminatory cut. And it was a clear case of discrimination. And I'm sorry if I missed stuff you said, but could you just repeat for us, when you come back to me, please, when the legislation will be passed and when the actual payments will be made, the date the payments will be made? And I'd also like to ask you if there's been any audit done by your department on the negative impact that may result on a certain cohort of people as a consequence of this, particularly using the 40 years, because there are already some pensioners who are saying that they will suffer as a result. They wouldn't be the homemakers, but they'd be others, if you know what I mean. There's kind of an inverse negative impact that may take place, and if the department has done any audit on that, would they please release it to us? The second thing, not unrelated, before I leave that, I want to thank Senator, sorry, Jesus, I should be able to say her name, no bother, Senator Higgins, for making the comment that we have this obscene tax break of $2 billion for private pensions, and then we get, you know, sort of worried about the little bits and pieces that we can give back on social protection. It seems to me absolutely we have a social welfare system that addresses the question of solidarity, but the imbalance and the naked sort of you know, preference over one against the other is quite something, and I want to thank Senator Higgins for raising that. Not unrelated to pensioners is the question of fuel poverty, and you might remember last year that we had a bit of a kerfuffle in the Dáil during an extreme weather event to ensure that another month's fuel payment was given to everybody, and that councils were instructed to leave the heating on in blocks of apartments that housed older persons. And I think we're going to see much, much more of this. In fact, I'm convinced, I'll bet you my house on it, that we're going to see more and more extreme weather events throughout the winter, and that fuel poverty is a huge issue. A recent MAB study in Ballyfermot showed a quarter of all households suffered from fuel poverty. That's very, very high. And, you know, combined with the increase in gas and electricity, the slow pace of retrofitting of homes, it is happening. You know, they're being insulated, attics are being insulated, and homes are being retrofitted, but it's not quick enough. There isn't enough focus on it, and as the weather gets colder and weather events get more extreme, people are having to spend a huge amount of their income to stay warm, and they make choices, literally make choices between staying warm and cooking hot meals. And I know I'm not the first one to quote that at you. So climate change is a fact that's going to impact on old people, and we need to consider you know, a future of solidarity with those who suffer from fuel poverty particularly harshly. I'd like to comment on the stuff about the live register, because it caught my eye immediately, and I think good news. Another 40,000 people left the live register last year, and 80,000 according to your figures here over the last 2 years. That's all very good news, but the question must also be asked what kind of jobs they're going into, and by that I mean we have witnessed in other studies from both unions and Social Justice Ireland, etc., an increase in low pay and an increase in low hours, which means that they may leave the live register, but it doesn't mean that they're Lana Walya, or that they're, you know, they're able to cope with what they have. And you don't mention if there's some kind of a comparator there between the return of people to work, and I would argue many of them are returning to low hours and low paid jobs, and how that compares with the impact on the working family payment, or what used to be FIS. Because, and we had a look at this when we were looking at employment rights, which, by the way, are now going to be fully part of this committee, which makes sense, and delighted to hear that. When we were looking at that, we can see that there are lots of employers that don't give the employees the full 19 hours that would allow them to benefit from the working family payment. So we're going to find that there's a level of poverty and a cohort of people who'll fall short of being able to claim the working family payment. And then we need to, I think, we need to have figures that show us how many workers that go back off the live register are falling short of being able to claim FIS or WFP or whatever it is properly called now. Because I think that there's a concern there, and that concern would apply to a lot of women in the hospitality industry, in the food industry, etc. And a lot of those women would also fall into the category of being lone parents. So if there was some way we could, I don't know how we address it, but if there was some way we could look at individual cases on an assessment basis for where employers refuse to give the 19 hours, that there might be some attempt to pay a family income support. On the carers allowance, you talk about it being not acceptable that the 18 weeks is a long time to wait for an application to go through. It's 4.5 months. It is a long time to wait. But I'm finding, in my experience, and maybe your department could comment on this, that there seems to be almost an automatic refusal when the answer comes. The answer is no, but you can appeal. And then the appeal process takes even longer, and I'd like to know what your department officials say about that appeal process and what the rate of refusal is, because I'm coming across, and just an experience in my clinics, etc., a very, very high refusal rate for carers, an attempt to put you into an appeal process, and a long appeal process which follows. If you could comment on that, please. And I want to come back to the lone parents again, and the universality, as you called it, of the child benefit. And I agree it's universal and that shouldn't be touched, but you've all referred to the extra costs to rear a teenager, somebody over 12 years of age. And what did the Vincentian Partnership said? It's 46.65 extra per week, they estimate. And I'm sure they didn't just suck their thumb and see. They must have done a study and come up with that figure. That's nearly €50 more a week to rear a teenager than it is to rear a younger child. And yet that's not taken into account. Now, accepting the universality of the payment and the benefit, and I do, is there no mechanism that you could look at that would means test an extra payment beyond 12 years of age, that would look at, say, lone parents that may need an extra few bob? Obviously, somebody like yourself who works, you're on a ministerial pay, you wouldn't need the extra money. You're doing law and while your kids are probably teenagers now. You don't need it, but there'll be lots of lone parents out there who could do it. Is there no way that you could look at a means test and means of giving that, acknowledging the science of that says that it costs more to rear children when they're teenagers, and also to look at giving child benefit up to not just 18 years of age, but up to they complete their leaving cert, because a lot of kids at 18, they turn 18 November, December, they still have to go through their leaving cert till next June, and that's hit a lot of women, a lot of families I know, and I've been asked to raise that. And then finally, on the income disregard, acknowledging that, and as you say in your presentation, that you did raise it again last year, but actually it's worth pointing out, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that it is still way lower than it was in 1997. And 1997 was at 115 punt, which equates to 146.50, and what a shame that in the 21st century we're still keeping that low pressure on the poverty of children. So would you consider getting rid of the income disregard in its entirety this year, a bit like Pascal Dunn, who was hinting at considering getting rid of FEMPI? And I say that with tongue in cheek. But those are the main things I want to raise. Thank you.
Chair, could I just correct the record on